has shown me how to try to live as an artist in the world. I'm going to read one poem. It's from Galway's first book. It's called Freedom, New Hampshire. Sorry, it's New Hampshire. And I read this poem once when I was teaching at Tufts University, one of my first teaching jobs. And my own brother was ill with AIDS at the time, but I wasn't allowed to speak of it. And I was looking through an anthology and I read this poem and I put my head down and wept, because it so much held everything in the world in it. It's for Galway's brother, Freedom, New Hampshire. 1. It's in 4 parts. We came to visit the cow, dying of fever. Toll said it was already shoveled under in a secret burial place in the woods. We prowled through the woods weeks. We never found where. Other children, other summers must have found the place and asked, why is it green here? The rich guess a grave. The poor think a pit for dung, like the one we shoveled in the fall, that came up brighter green the next year, that could as well have been the grave of a cow or something, for all that shows. 2. We found a cow's skull once. We thought it was from one of the asses in the Bible, for the sun shone into the holes through which it had seen earth as an endless belt carrying gravel, had heard its truculence cursed, had learned how human sweat stinks, and had brayed, shone into the holes with solemn and majestic light, as if some skull somewhere could be Baalbek or the Parthenon. That night, passing Toll's barn, we saw lights. Toll had lassoed a calf by its hind legs, and he tugged against the grip of the darkness. The cow stood by, chewing millet. Derry and I took hold, too, and hauled. It was sopping with darkness when it came free. It was a bull calf. The cow mopped it a while, and we walked around it with a lantern. And it was sunburned somehow, and beautiful. It took a teat as the first business, and sneezed, and drank the milk of light. When we got it balanced on its legs, it went wobbling toward the night. Walking home in darkness, we saw a July moon looking on Freedom, New Hampshire. We smelled the fall in the air. It was the summer. We thought, oh, this is but the summer. 3. Once I saw the moon drift into the sky like a bright pregnancy, paired from a goddess who had to keep slender to remain beautiful. Cut loose and drifting up there to happen by itself, and waning in lost labor, as we lost our labor too, afternoons when we sat on the gate by the pasture, under the ledge, buzzing and skirling on toilet-papered combs, tunes to the rumble-seated cars taking the Ossipee Road on Sundays. For though dusk would come upon us where we sat, and though we had skirled out our hearts in the music, yet the not yet dandruffed harps we skirled it on had done not much better than flies, which buzzed when quick we trapped them in our hands, which went silent when we crushed them, which we bore downhill to the meadowlark's nest full of throats, which Derry charmed and combed with an Arabian air, while I chucked crushed flies into innards I could not see. For the night had fallen, and the crickets shrilled on all sides in waves, as if the grass leaves shrieked by hillsides as they grew, and the stars made small flashes in the sky, like mica flashing in rocks on the choke-cherried ledge, where bees I stepped on once hit us from behind like a shotgun, and where we could see window panes and freedom flash, and Loon Lake and Winnipesaukee flash in the sun, and the blue world flashing. 4. The fingerprints of our eyeballs would zigzag on the sky. The clouds that came drifting up our fingernails would drift into the thin air. In bed at night, there was music, if you listened, of an old surf breaking far away in the blood. Children who come by chance on grass green for a man can guess cow, dung, man, anything they want. To them, it is the same. But to us, who knew him as he was, after the beginning and before the end, it is green for a name called out of the confusions of the earth. Winnipesaukee coined like a moon, a bullpack dragged from the darkness where it breaks up again. Larks, which long since have crashed for good in the grass, to which we fed the flies, buzzing ourselves like flies, while the crickets shrilled beyond us in July. The mind may sort it out and give it names. When a man dies, he dies trying to say without slurring the abruptly decaying sounds. It is true that only flesh dies. The spirit flowers without stop. For men, cows, dung, for all dead things. It is good, yes. But an incarnation is in particular flesh. And the dust that is swirled into a shape and crumbles and is swirled again had but one shape. That was this man. When he is dead, the grass heals what he suffered. But he remains dead. And the few who loved him know this until they die.
It's my deep pleasure to be here celebrating Galway, someone whose work that I've turned to at every part of my life as a young poet, as a father, as someone who, like many of us here, appreciate and celebrate nature. Poets apprentice themselves to other poets. And when I was young in college looking for models, Galway happened to be one of those poets that I too discovered. And throughout my life, I returned to his books. And one poem in particular that I chose to read, I study, mainly because on the surface, it sounds like a hunt, but underneath is something deeper and spiritual that is happening that speaks to the art of poetry. Once I was watching TV and happened upon a documentary about Walt Whitman, and there was Galway talking about Walt Whitman, and he said something that was actually, to my mind, counterintuitive, which was that when most people talk about poets that they admire, they'll mention how that person has a good ear, but Walt Whitman had a good mouth. Which speaks to the ritualized approach to language, and also the sacredness of language that poets engage in when they start to write. This is The Bear. In late winter, I sometimes glimpse bits of steam coming up from some fault in the old snow, and bend close and see it is lung-colored, and put down my nose and know the chilly, enduring odor of bear. I take a wolf's rib and whittle it sharp at both ends and coil it up and freeze it in blubber and place it out on the fairway of the bears. And when it has vanished, I move out on the bear tracks, roaming in circles until I come to the first tentative, dark splash on the earth. And I set out running, following the splashes of blood wandering over the world. At the cut, gashed resting places, I stop and rest at the crawl marks where he lay out on his belly to overpass some stretch of botchy ice. I lie out, dragging myself forward with bare knives in my fist. On the third day, I begin to starve. At nightfall, I bend down, as I knew I would, at a turd sopped in blood, and hesitate and pick it up and thrust it in my mouth and gnash it down and rise and go on running. On the seventh day, living by now on bare blood alone, I can see his upturned carcass far out ahead, a scraggled, steamy hulk, the heavy fur riffling in the wind. I come up to him and stare at the narrow space, petty eyes, the dismayed face laid back on the shoulder, the nostrils flared, catching perhaps the first taint of me as he died. I hack a ravine in his thigh and eat and drink and tear him down his whole length and open him and climb in and close him up after me against the wind and sleep. And dream of lumbering flat-footed over the tundra, stabbed twice from within, splattering a trail behind me, splattering it out to no matter which way I lurch, no matter which parabola of bare transcendence, which dance of solitude I attempt, which gravity clutch leap, which trudge, which groan. Until one day I totter and fall on his stomach that has tried so hard to keep up, to digest the blood as it leaked in, to break up and digest the bone itself. And now the breeze blows over me, blows off the hideous belches of ill-digested bare blood and rotted stomach and the ordinary wretched odor of bear. Blows across my sore, lulled tongue, a song or a screech, until I think I must rise up and dance, and I lie still. I awaken, I think. Marsh lights reappear, geese come trailing again up the flyway. In her ravine under old snow, the damn bear lies, licking lumps of smeared fur and drizzly eyes into shapes with her tongue. And one hairy-souled trudge stuck out before me, the next groaned out, the next. The rest of my days I spend wandering, wondering what, anyway, was that sticky infusion, that rank flavor of blood, that poetry by which I lived.
My mother's are and are. She lay late in bed. Maybe she was sick, though she was never sick. There were pink flowers in full blossom in the wallpaper, and motes like bits of something ground up, churning in sun rays from the windows. We climbed into bed with her. Perhaps she needed comforting, and she was alone, and she let us take a breast each out of the loose slip. "Let's make believe we're babies," Derry said. We put the large pink flowers at the end of those lax breasts into our mouths and sucked with enthusiasm. She laughed and seemed to enjoy our play. perhaps intoxicated by our pleasure, or frustrated by the failure of the milk to flow, we sucked harder, probably our bodies writhed, our eyes flared, maybe she could feel our teeth. Abruptly, she took back her breasts and sent us from the bed, two small, hungry boys, inflamed and driven off by the she-wolf. But we had got our nip, and in the empire we would found, we would taste every woman and expel each one who came to resemble her. What can you do? I want to just scream with the joy of the power of poetry. My heavens. Thank you, Galway. Thank you for inspiring us. Shelley. When I was 20, the one true free spirit I had heard of was Shelley. Shelley, who wrote tracts advocating atheism, free love, the emancipation of women, the abolition of wealth and class, and poems on the bliss of romantic love. Shelley, who, I learned later, perhaps almost too late, remarried Harriet, then pregnant with their second child, and a few months later ran off with Mary, already pregnant herself, bringing with them Mary's stepsister, Claire, who very likely also became his lover. And in this malaise à trois, which Shelley had imagined would be a paradise of exiles, they lived, along with the specter of Harriet, who drowned herself in the Serpentine, and of Mary's half-sister Fanny, who killed herself maybe for unrequited love of Shelley, and with the spirits of adored but often neglected children conceived incidentally in the pursuit of Eros. Harriet's Ianthe and Charles, denied to Shelley and consigned to foster parents. Mary's Clara, dead at 1. Her Wilmouse, Shelley's favorite, dead at 3. Elena, the baby in Naples, almost surely Shelley's own, whom he adopted and then left behind, dead at 1.5. Allegra, Claire's daughter by Byron, whom Byron sent off to the convent at Bagnacavallo at 4, dead at 5. And in those days, before I knew any of this, I thought I followed Shelley, who thought he was following radiant desire. I drove here today from Pittsfield, New Hampshire, and when I got into Vermont, there's a place to pull off beside a river. And this bobbed over to the edge of the river, and I pulled it out. Message to Galway Kinnell. Message to Galway Kinnell. Today and tonight, all over the world, by sunlight and by singing light, you are being read. In a bazaar at Fez, someone is reading What a Kingdom It Was. And a rookie in his bat bag on the road with the socks carries 2 flower herding on Mount Monadnocks. Near Hibiscus on his royal lava crags, a Kamehamehan holds his body rags to his breast. And on the sea somewheres, a sailor weeps into her book of nightmares. and inked and dog-eared in Peru, is a kissed copy of the avenue bearing the initial of Christ into the New World. And packed when the scrolls of the tents are furled, and carried on their tongues by Sephards and Kurds, are mortal acts, mortal words. And up in the sky, an idoliclast astronaut is reading the past and missing the earth. Dear Grindlestone, one misses when one has lived a long time alone. And in some pavillon of hardy silk, a gull in Bonnefoy is reading Rilke. All your readers in the universe who have for your work no imperfect thirst, your readers, if I may be so bold as to say, on our hearts strong is your hold. On the tree of time below you and above you, they asked me to tell you today that we love you. With this, we all will lift a glass as well, and not so formal as to Galway Kinnell. We thank you from our hearts, where you live always, to each of us our own one Galway.
I'm going to read just one poem, a more recent poem called The Quick and the Dead. And just a note, I know you've heard it, but we should say up here about part of Galway's genius is a narrative genius. And that when he started doing that 50 years ago, nobody else was doing it. Nobody else was doing it. And it was Galway said, story